I'm ready. Need to put your mic on, though.
Thank you, Kim from BevCam. Good evening, everybody. Tonight is Thursday, February 27th, 2025. This is a meeting of the Finance and Facilities Subcommittee. We are meeting this evening in a hybrid setup, and this is available to us through the Acts of 2021, which have been several times extended. And it grants us the permission to, among other things, hold meetings remotely by suspending the need for a quorum and a chair to be physically present, although we do have both the quorum and the chair physically present this evening. It asks our body to use technology to allow for safe public access. And as a note, Beverly has prior approval for remote participation of members, although through that permission, the chair and the quorum must be physically present when this act and its extensions expire. So tonight's F&F, there's no place on our agenda for public remarks, although I haven't seen any members of the public join the Zoom, and there are no members of the public in person with us here this evening. However, joining us today, there are members of the school committee, various members of the district administration and leadership teams, as well as a fabulous city councilor. And I'll do a roll call in a minute, make sure that I can have on record who all's here this evening. I'm going to remind everybody, especially if you're on Zoom, to remain on mute. Anything you say on this platform will become part of the official meeting record. And for those of us in the room, I'm going to remind us to unmute when we want to talk, because last night that seemed to be a real problem. We're going to try to limit how many times Mr. Kim from BevCam has to tell us to unmute our microphones. All right, so let's start with our friends in the room. And we'll make sure that we can hear you on the platform. Fellow school committee member, Dr. Silva.
Here.
Committee resident representative, Dominic.
Here.
Director of Finance, Emma Puglisi.
Here.
I saw how many times you had to push that button. Executive Director of Operations, Ms. Brown.
Here.
And on the Zoom, fellow school committee person, Kim Coelho.
Here.
We have BevCam in the booth. City Councilor Steve Crowley, who's driving, so he might not be able to unmute. And all right, we'll just skip right along. Superintendent of Schools, Sue Chirocek.
Here.
And our Director of Buildings and Grounds, Mr. Bob Schiroli.
Here.
Oh, and in the waiting room, hold on a minute. I'm letting in Dr. Morgan. There we go. We heard that little ding. Dr. Morgan is connecting to audio, and so we'll wait one more minute and make sure we can see or hear him. Dr. Morgan, thank you for joining us this evening. Can you unmute for half a second and let us know if you can hear us?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. All right. I am going to share my screen and we will get started with the presentation from Miss Erin Brown. All right. I lost my Zoom. I'm a little rusty. Who said that last night on the Zoom meeting? I'm a little rusty. All right. Share. Okay, everybody. I have a medium amount of stuff to get through this evening. I'm going to do my best to be a good Vanna, dating myself with that reference. And we have a couple of votes. All of our votes will be via roll call because we do have a school committee member joining us via the Zoom. All right, I'm ready, Ms. Brown.
Did you want to start with the minutes from the previous?
Well, look, we're on your very first slide, so I'll go next slide. And I'll go, oh, look, here's our agenda for the evening. And the first item on the agenda is, in fact, approval of our meeting minutes from our January 21st meeting. I'm looking for a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
Motion to approve?
Ms. Coelho, were you at that meeting? I don't believe you were. All right, I will second. I will make the second.
Yes, I was. I had to go back to double check. I was at that meeting.
Okay, all right, then I'm going to do, any questions, corrections on the meeting minutes? Seeing none, I'll tell everybody who's online, I'm doing my best to watch to see if you put your hand up. If you are wanting to speak and I haven't recognized your hand, please unmute and just ask that you just say question. Okay, all right, so we'll call the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland. Oh, you were abstaining, you were not here, thank you. And myself, yes. That passes 3 to 0 to 1 if we're doing like soccer keeping score. Okay, next is our building and grounds report, and even though we have Mr. Schroely on the phone, he's not really here to talk about the buildings and grounds report. However, we will totally abuse him and take this chance if any of us have questions. Does anybody have any questions on the building and ground report or for Mr. Schroely while we have him here? All right, Kim, I'm looking for your hand. I don't see one. All right, this is not a voting item. This is more as an FYI. And if you do think that you have some questions later on, you can email them to either Aaron or Emma, and they will work to relay those questions to Mr. Schroely and then get an answer back.
I can ask a quick question, if that's okay.
Yes, you may ask a quick question, Mr. Copeland.
Yes, just a quick question about, I know a few meetings ago, we were talking about the infestation issues.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it again tonight.
Okay, that's already on the agenda?
Yeah,
Yes.
a little
All right.
later.
Well, kind of, yeah, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, we're going to talk about it. So
All right.
I think it falls under policy. Oh, no, it doesn't. It's number 6, pest control.
Yep.
I need a bigger font.
I will reserve that question for later.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Now we're going to go into a federal and states grant overview. I'm going next slide, right?
Yep.
Yes, please.
Oh, and I'll say for the record, Councilor Crowley has managed to get out of his vehicle and is joining us at the table. You have not missed anything other than humor so far. I will bring you a microphone. Okay, this slide, this is where you want to be?
Yes. that
And
is
do you
where we
want
wanna
it to be this big, or you want me to try to make it bigger?
You could try and make it a little bigger. That'd be great. So Emma has done a great job preparing tonight to share. We're going a little out of order, and that's why we have kind of some of the buildings and grounds and other items towards the end of the meeting. Normally they are towards the beginning. So we wanted Emma to have enough time to be able to present her information. She's done a wonderful job with the report for everyone tonight. So I'll turn it over to Emma.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate the Zoom. For the folks in the room, I also have hard copies because I know that is a bit of an eye chart. And so for those of you who were at school committee last night, when Dr. Chirocek introduced sort of the budget process, she had mentioned that me being new, I'm sort of looking at things with a different perspective, and one of those perspectives that I think is really helpful for us, especially as we navigate the current climate of our country, and there's a lot of conversation going on around federal funding, to really look at holistically all of the sources of funding that we utilize to run the Beverly Public Schools. So some of that is, an absolutely a good share of that is local tax dollars. Additionally, it is state aid. But we also have a substantial amount of federal grants, some state grants, other ways that federal funds show up in our district. And given the conversation that had happened sort of at the national level since our last meeting, Ms. Visnick had asked that we could perhaps talk about that a little bit. So the report that you have there has our 3 prior years as well as our current budget year, actual and budget, of how we utilize funding in our district. So the first section is a school operating budget, which is appropriated through local contributions and state funding via Chapter 70. The next section is local tax dollars that are spent on behalf of the school, but that are appropriated through city budgets. And that includes things like debt service for school buildings, retiree health insurance, school choice and charter tuitions, things like that. And then we have our federal grant, our state grants, our school nutrition programs, which is both state and federally funded, followed by our revolving funds, which are funds that are supported through the collection of fees or other receipts. So definitely happy to answer questions, but just sort of wanted to use this to sort of set the stage. As you look back, you'll see that in the prior years, we had substantially more federal funding than we have budgeted in this year. That is because we unfortunately said goodbye to our ESSER funding, which was post-COVID recovery funding, which was definitely a boost in that line. And we can look a little bit later on. We'll have another slide that includes some information about sort of for our entitlement and other federal grants that are generally recurring, where they sort of have been over the past 5 years, which has been pretty stable around that $2.5 million mark. And so on one side, one page you have revenues, and on the other side you have the offsetting expenses. So that you can sort of look at those two things in tandem. Do I get to call on people? Do I get to call on people? I saw Jeff's hand.
I'm so busy trying to be Vanna, and yeah, sure. You have all the power. You may call on people.
Dr. Silva?
So I see this other special revenue.
Yes.
An increase or a appearance of $2.2 million.
Yes.
That has not occurred in any of the previous years.
Yes.
And it seems to be compensating for the gap that we have for the federal grants.
So it's covering for, it is the like amalgamation of all of the ways that our funding comes together. So part of that, right, when we went through last budget cycle, we acknowledged that we were going to be utilizing more of our circuit breaker. We were going to utilize the full carry forward amount plus also additional funds. And we touched on it a little bit last night as well. So we acknowledged that we did that with circuit breaker, similarly a bit with school choice. And so our other special revenue funds, our revolving funds, are able to carry forward balances. And between things like the availability of ESSER funds that have allowed us a little bit more flexibility in prior years, as well as picking up the additional cost of the health insurance increase a couple of years ago and the OSD increase in that circuit breaker line. In this budget cycle, we had acknowledged that we were going to have to utilize more of those reserves that had been able to accumulate over the past few years.
So, I mean, why is it appearing as a separate line item as opposed to an increase in all of the other existing special revenue?
So I have.
All right, I'm going to ask, wait, may I interrupt? I'm going to ask you to give me a hint so I can annotate on the screen what you're asking about, like approximately, we're in other specials, right? And we're in columns of years. The rightmost column is this year, right?
Yes.
Right.
How many?
It's right.
Okay, excellent.
Right here.
Right above the pink, right?
Yeah, so it's not showing up for any of the previous years, and then there's 2.2 million.
This one,
here.
where I just drew that line?
Yes. Yes, so I had broken out so that we could see anticipated revenues coming in each one of those funds. And then you will see sort of the revenue utilization or the expense utilization on the next page.
Okay.
Similarly spaced. So you'll see there the 4.3 that we intend to expend for circuit breaker, the 1.3 and change that we intend to expend for school choice.
Okay.
And there too, you will see that in those prior years, right, some amount of carry forward in each of those individual funds sort of had created in that revolving fund carry forward generated line, which totals very similar. I think that was 2.28, and on the revenue side, it was 2.24. So it really was just sort of that year over year ability.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, Mr. Copeland.
Yeah, so a quick question to that. So going forward, is that going to change? Because now there's no ESSER funds, and our ability to carry forward, will that be a little bit different?
it is very probable to be different. As we are moving through this budget cycle, we are looking at, again, all of our available budget offsets as part of our holistic budget process, looking at anticipated revenues where we expect they'll fall, carry forward balances, and we'll actually get to look a little bit at that a little bit later on in the presentation as well. And so really, as we move this budget cycle, we're looking holistically at all of the ways that we generate funds in our district and utilize those funds to make sure that we're in balance and that, it's sort of ideal practice to be able to carry forward an amount of money in your revolving funds to give you some space, some permission to utilize them in times like this. Deal practice is generally like 1 year's balance in there, and then that you would use that much or whatever your anticipated carry forward balance is to generate your budget, so that you're not leveraging too far into funds that are not yet collected.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, that's just the part I was getting at. Is it something that we have year over year, which it sounds like it is? It just depends on what amount it will be each.
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Thank you.
Are you ready for the
All
next
right,
slide?
next slide.
All right, I zoomed way in, so let me zoom back out. Oh, what is going on with my little, get out of here. My little annotation. Okay, here we go. This one? We're on the right slide?
Yes, on the right slide. So because really the hope and desire for the beginning of this conversation had been to talk about our federal funds, I wanted to give you a brief overview of what the the purpose of the funds, which really then dictates what the allowable expenses are. All federal funds are pretty strictly mandated about what we're allowed to spend them on. They have a bunch of rules that go along with them. So our Title I funds the program is aimed at closing educational achievement gaps. In recent years, our middle school became our Title I school. Prior to that, our Title I funds had been designated at the elementary level. And so we do lots of wonderful things with those funds. Some of our curriculum support staff at the middle school and our director of restorative practice, those positions are made available through Title I, as well as additional, I believe, reading supports, supplies, things like that. Title IIA supports teacher education, and we use that in this district really largely for our new teacher mentor program, providing stipends to those folks and professional development opportunities for all of our staff. Next slide. Our Title III funding supports additional materials and opportunities for our multilingual learners and their families across the district. And Title IV funding is used to provide additional opportunities to all of our students in an effort, specifically this year, to combat chronic absenteeism and other initiatives to really make sure that kids are building a high-quality educational experience. Next slide. And then these are our two special education grants. They are both governed under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, though one of the grants is also titled that. And so it is very often referred to as the 240 grant, which is the funding code designated by DESE. And that is to support special education initiatives to make sure that students are receiving the services that they need. In this district, we use that to offer our extended school year program in the district, as well as to support a number of paraprofessional positions. I believe we have 40 paraprofessionals on our 240 grant currently. It's able to support that many between, again, some grant carry forward and the current year funding. And then the early childhood grant is, again, to support special education services, but specifically targeted for students ages 3 through 5. So sort of in that space between when they would leave early intervention and when they would necessarily be covered, at the kindergarten level.
I'm refusing to go to the next slide. I wish to ask, and part of the reason why I asked you to bring this information forward, and I do appreciate it, is based on what's happening at the federal level, there's a lot of chatter about this particular program going away. And so you can tell me it's on an upcoming slide relative to if in fact if we're going to talk about this more on an upcoming slide, then I'll hold my question. I want to know, like, how much of this money, if this goes away and we are committed to still providing every single child the free and appropriate public education to which we believe every child should be afforded, then how much of a hit are we going to take if we don't have these funds?
It is on an upcoming slide, but
There
I'll
we
give you,
go.
do you want a hint?
No, I kind of don't want to know the number. I'm sad, so
Okay.
I'll just wait till we get there.
The next slide.
I'm sad that we even have to have this conversation. Okay.
Absolutely. And so then our last recurring federal grant is our Perkins grant, which supports CTE education. And so in our district, that shows up as providing additional supports to our culinary and our EMT programs, and other programs in any specific year. But those are the two that are particularly being focused on this year through the grant work.
Okay, and again, I apologize, people who are online, if you want to put your hand up. I have the little, all of you are showing up on the sidebar, so everybody in the room can help me watch for hands up on that sidebar. I'm looking around the room too, before I call on myself yet again with another question about this particular grant. Does this money ever pay for our after dark, or can it? Is it eligible? For instance, could we use some of this money to pay the increase that we talked about in last night's meeting for the after dark costs with Salem? Our after costs Salem contract is going up next year, right?
Yes.
We talked about that last night.
Yes.
Are any of those eligible to be paid out of this fund?
I do not know off the top of my head, but I can tell you that the funds through this grant is quite small compared to what we spend on our After Dark program tuitions at Essex Tech and Salem.
And so what we're spending it on, it is fully consumed on those things.
Yes.
There's none left to maybe cover the additional cost. I was trying to be creative there, okay?
I appreciate your creativity.
Next slide, I'm going.
And so this is a look back over the last 5 years of what our grant entitlements have been for each one of those grants that we talked about. And so in whole, we have been averaging about $2.5 million in federal funds through these grant programs. These are not the only places that federal funds show up, and we'll talk a little bit more about those as well. I don't have a slide, so I might as well bring it up now because it is a little bit more timely. I know that there is a conversation happening very much right now in the news about Medicaid and Medicaid funding. And it is not reflected on that report there, but we do participate in school-based claiming for Medicaid. It is not on that report because those funds actually go and sit on the city side of the books because of how revenue recognition laws are written in Mass General Law. But we do bring in about $450,000 a year into the city through reimbursement claims, and those are federal dollars as well.
Fantastic, because I was going to ask that question too. And now I see the answer to my other question, and now I'm really sad. Okay. Next slide. Sorry, Dr. Silva.
The 450,000 are due to students or
Yes.
students and faculty?
Students. So it is student claims. So when we provide Medicaid eligible services, which include things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, other sorts of interventions, mental health services in specific capacities, we are able to actually bill that through Medicaid and get reimbursed.
And to hammer that home one more time because we talked a little bit about it last night, but there are times when, for instance, if a child choices out, we have to pay for them to go to the other district, but that payment goes out on the city side of the budget. We wouldn't see it on our budget as like a negative, right? But the city side budget would see it as an outflow. Choice in money does show as a positive on our budget. And so this is a similar kind of thing where there's a differentiation. Those reimbursements come in on the city side. So we don't see them per se directly here.
Yeah, so
Go ahead, yes.
the 450,000, that's to a subset of students that qualify for
Yes.
that type of funding.
Yeah, so it is, there is a lot of rules and regulations about, it is, students, if they're eligible, parents also have to consent in, and it's specific kinds of services, and there's all sorts of,
So
Back
who
end.
usually qualifies for that 450,000 of funding?
students who are not necessarily on Medicaid, but it's largely students with disabilities who are receiving those services, yes.
And on a future slide, are you going to talk about potentials of impact of any given one of these things? Or we're just stating what they are?
We are stating what they are. As I went through this, I wanted to focus on what we know rather than on the speculative of, because I feel like it changes very often. So I wanted to share what we know today so that we could all speculate individually or together, but certainly not led by my speculation.
We can all have anxiety about it together? Okay.
And I did just want to share too that most of our federal grants do have a 27-month use period, which allows us to carry forward funds into the subsequent year. And we largely do this because the next year's grants don't really come out until the early fall, and best case scenario, they're getting approved in October. And so this allows us to spend them over the summer and in the early fall for grants where we have staffing on them to make sure that we have the funds to pay their salaries. As we mentioned with our 240 IDEA grant, we use it to fund our extended summer program. And so the FY25 grant will fund the summer of 25 extended summer program. Also, I want to make it clear as well that these are reimbursement-based grants. So as we expend them, we can draw them down, but they are not awarded in whole beforehand.
All of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So as I had mentioned before, there are a number of rules, regulations, laws that govern how we can spend our federal grant funds. And one of the like most true thing is that these funds are meant to supplement and not supplant. And so really what that means is that they are meant to be additional and supportive to the work that is funded through our other revenue sources and tax capacity at the local and state level, but they are not allowed to replace them. And so sort of like the easiest way to sort of test that, DESE's litmus test, is that if federal funds were used to provide services that the district paid for with non-federal funds in the prior year, that would be considered supplanting. So if I am paid by appropriated money this year and you were to put me onto one of our title grants next year, that would be considered supplanting. And really, the reason for that is a metric that DESE refers to as maintenance of effort, which ensures that the district maintains a consistent level of local and state funding related to programs year over year. And so at the end of every year, we fill out our end of year report where we report all of the money that we spend from each category that we spend it and how we have spent it. And then the state calculates our maintenance of effort to make sure that we have not said, oh, well, our Title I grant went up, and therefore we can allocate less funding to the middle school because it'll make up the difference. And that is what that is the exact opposite of what they want us to do with this money.
Dr. Silva, did I see your hand up?
Yeah. So does that mean that, are you able to shift the percentages in terms of if you had federal funding that you used to fund it at 80 or 70%, but the following year it went to 60 or 50%, can you bring in additional funds to level that up with these funds?
It would depend on if the cost of the thing went up. So, dollar for dollar, we cannot spend less local funds. But if we were funding a curriculum subscription license, and the cost of that license went up, the differential, which is new and therefore has not been paid by tax dollars or other funding before, could be,
So you can increase that proportionally?
yes.
Okay.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. So our school nutrition program, Beverly Public Schools participates in a number of different programs. We have the lunch program, the breakfast program, as well as our summer food program. And these are funded at both the state and federal level. At the federal level, the programs are funded under the USDA. The way that the funding works, following the COVID pandemic, when the USDA temporarily fully funded school meals for all students, following that, the state of Massachusetts became one of 8 states to authorize the approval of state-funded universal free school meals. And so under this funding structure, the federal funds are used to pay for the free and reduced portion of qualifying students' meals, and the state picks up the differential. So for students who don't qualify for free and reduced lunch, it pays their whole meal. For students who qualify for reduced lunch, it pays the difference. And the state's not picking up any portion of students who qualify for free lunch because that's picked up under the federal funding. If Massachusetts were to no longer be a universal free meals state, Beverly Public Schools is also considered a CEP district, which is Community Eligibility Provision. And that is based on the number or the percentage of our population that qualifies through the direct certification process that is run through the state. In 2023, that threshold was lowered from 40% to 25%, and that is when our district became eligible. Should that threshold change, we may no longer be eligible.
And so let's roll that one forward. If it went back up to 40% and we're no longer eligible for CEP status, then our families who qualify for free lunch would still have their free lunch paid for through the federal program. The families who had a child on reduced lunch, part of their meal would be paid for on the federal program. The differential would still come from the state?
Yes, so the state funding is not related to the CEP designation.
Okay, but then everybody else who doesn't qualify for free or reduced lunch, we would have to make up the difference of that funding if we're not in CEP.
If
right?
the state rolls back their program. So right now, the state pays the differential for anybody who's not considered free or reduced eligible. If the state's funding were to cease and then CEP went away, then yes. But if CEP went away and we still were, and the state still offered universal free meals, our students wouldn't see a change. And our families wouldn't see a
what
state
about
change.
what about my very possessive there? What about our budget? What would our budget see if such a change were to happen? Because our food services department is what is the word?
Self-funded?
Self-funded. And so are they going to see a hit if something like that happens, or are they insulated from that?
They would be they could potentially see a hit. So it would likely be similar to the pre-COVID days, right, where students paid for their lunch on their lunch accounts rather than just you know.
Okay. So I
Yes.
think, I just want to be very clear on that, because that's not necessarily a fee. It's not like our sports fee. However, it sure would feel like a fee if the charge for lunches came back, right? So I'm just trying to
Yes.
understand that too, and a lot of ifs. That was a lot of ifs.
There's a lot of
so
ifs,
I'm not
yes.
going to speculate any further. Are we ready for the next slide?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, wait, I think I did too.
Oh, you did too.
There we go.
State grants, and I just wanted to touch on these quickly because I had shared that all fund summary with you, just to sort of share that the availability and eligibility of most state grants is variable year over year, and so they are minimally included in our budget process and are viewed as supplemental, so they are always wonderful and enjoyable, and we can do incredible things with them. However, when we talk about the impact of, if our federal funding is at risk, it's a much more significant impact because those are recurring grants that we expect and that we count on as we look holistically at our budget process. That is not true. That same truth is not there for grants, state grants.
Just on from a math point of view, on the big on the big O, the state grants are not nearly in the same category.
Correct.
Okay. Oh, I went the wrong way, I'm sorry. Gonna get fired.
Never. It's a really hard job. And then just again, because we had looked holistically, I wanted to share a little bit of information about revolving funds. So we do have a number of revolving funds that are funded through either state reimbursement or fee collection. Massachusetts general law governs the administration of revolving funds. That hyperlink there, for those of you who are really into fun things, will take you to a chart on the Department of Local Services, which is a subsection of the Department of Revenue. And it just sort of breaks down the allowable uses in the chapter of law for each type of fund. For the ones that are called out specifically in the law. Other revolving funds are allowed to exist. They just have to get approved by the local authority first. But a number of our revolving funds, including our school lunch program, are called out in specific sections of the law. And again, that law dictates the allowable uses of those funds. So receipts into, for instance, our school nutrition program can only be used to support the school nutrition program. We could not fund a math teacher through those funds.
Right, and so we see that in our budget when we see that, for instance, we have an athletics revolving fund and we pay the coaches out of that fund.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions? I'm looking for hands. Okay. I'm looking online. I see none. Next slide. Here we go.
Just a
you're
couple
ready
more
or
things.
not ready?
Just a couple more things, especially because we did start a small conversation about fees last night. I did want to point out that the fees that support our transportation, athletic, and preschool revolving funds were last increased to be effective in fiscal year 2014. So it has been some time, and which is part of why we can very easily sort of project what our revenues might look like, because those fee bases have stayed the same. And as we had talked about before, it is generally considered ideal practice to maintain a balance of 1 year of receipts in any given fund, and to only budget the anticipated year-end balance in the subsequent year. We are not, and again, that's ideal practice. There are times where you cannot have the ideal practice. We know that. I just wanted to put that out there, that in a perfect world, that is where people would like to be.
Yeah, so 10 years is a long time. And so the amount, and a ballpark figure for that combined,
You just stay tuned. It's on the next
okay,
slide.
all right,
It's a plant.
all right. I didn't see the slides. So.
I'm feeling very good about the fact that I've anticipated a lot of questions. Because I do, so I'm feeling good about that. So this here is a quick summary in this year of what our starting balance was, what our anticipated revenues are, as well as what our budgeted expenses are, and through simple math, where we sort of project to end at the end of this year, as well as what that percent translates into as an anticipated carry forward. So in our circuit breaker, again, that is one where as a district, long before my time, considering I'm very new, the district as a whole worked really hard to build up that fund balance to be 1 year's carry forward. Circuit breaker is interesting in that the law does not state a minimum, but it does state a maximum. And so you cannot carry forward in circuit breaker any more than 1 year's revenue. And so, you know, as you all, my understanding is as you all went through this year's budget cycle, this was a part of that conversation, but we do see that there. And again, some of those instances where we were able to carry forward a larger balance, like in our school choice, which at the beginning of this year was a little bit in excess of 1 year's of anticipated revenues. It will end this year, because we've been spending that down, at about 51%.
Scoot over it all? I mean, are we? I blew it up and now it doesn't all fit on one page. Go back. Are you ready, Vanna, for the next slide?
I am. It's really just an opportunity to ask questions.
All right, I'm looking around the room, trying not to piglet the air online. All right, there's going to be a quiz later.
So possibility of increasing.
Mike?
Sorry. So possibility, since 2014 was the last update to those fees, there could be consideration to maybe adjust those moving, in the future, depending on what the funds look like.
Such a statement will get you a lot of coal in your stocking, I believe. But the reality is, and I said this last night when we were, haggling about how long should a computer last.
Yeah. I'm just being realistic. I mean,
Absolutely,
2014
absolutely.
it's 10 years.
I think that there are going to be, this budget. Right, so here is our agenda. So that was our federal and state grant overview. So now we're heading into voting time. People, are you ready? Loosen up. We got to do some voting. Let's see. The first item is gifts to schools. Was the first item gifts to schools?
Yes, it
Did I
was.
mess that up? Okay. There's our meeting minutes. Get off my screen. All right, here we go. Gifts to schools. In the total of $7,153.40 this month, or in the month of January. I'm looking for a motion to accept this gift to school.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Okay, hold on 1 second, because I have to keep my own minutes over here. Dr. Silva and Ms. Coelho. Are there any questions on these gifts to schools? Seeing none, we'll go through our little roll call vote. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes, that passes 4-0. Okay, our next item, and I'll get that off my screen, is the first of 2 budget transfers that were in your packets, but I also have now just put this particular budget transfer up on the screen. Let's see if I can make it a little larger. And the answer is yes. So budget transfer number 1033. I'm looking for a motion to accept this particular budget transfer.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Coelho. And does anybody have any questions about this particular budget transfer? Yes, Dr. Silva.
Brief summary of what this.
Microphone?
Microphone. Oh, now that we're up to 2. Okay, the over-under is 4, and I bet the under. So help me out here.
Just a brief overview of what that's for.
Absolutely. So this is just to reallocate funds that were budgeted for student club advisors between the middle school and the high school. So based on offerings, the middle school was trending a little bit low, what was budgeted, and the high school was trending a little bit over. So it's just to move some funds from the middle school student activities advisor line to the high school student activity advisor line.
Okay.
All right, I'm looking around. Any further questions? All right, roll call. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes, that passes 4-0. Okay, budget transfer number 2 in your packets. Budget transfer number 1554. I'll make it a little bigger on our screen here in the room. I'm looking for a motion to approve this budget transfer.
So moved.
Second?
All right, hold on a minute. Dr. Silva was the second. This one missed my little notes sheet. Coelho was the first. All right, so there's a motion on the table. Does anybody have any questions about this particular budget transfer? Yes, Mr. Copeland?
Yeah, can we just briefly touch on some of these and what that entails?
Absolutely. So we had some funds available throughout our OT fund code that I had moved into reserve for negotiations to reserve the funds to support the MASC contract that was signed for the superintendent search. And then I happened upon the fact that we had, in fact, a superintendent search expense line, and it felt very appropriate to put the funds there instead so that they would be called out, not just now, but in the future, should anybody look back and know exactly what those funds were utilized for. And so this is me moving those funds that I was able to pull together throughout our OT fund code. And then also during the conversation at school committee, in which the committee had voted to approve the contract with MASC, there was also some conversation about the sort of ancillary costs, advertising, posting, things like that. And the recommendation had been made that there were some savings in the school committee training line available as a result of members not going to the MASC conference. And so a small portion of those funds was also allocated into that same line.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. Here comes the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes. That passes 4-0. Our next item to be considered is acceptance of this grant. Let me make it a little bigger on the screen. An amount of $7,900 for comprehensive school health service. This is actually a funding increase. We've already voted and accepted this grant. So this is like a pile-on. And I'll just reiterate what I love to say. I learned from some other school committee member, perhaps named Paul Manzo, why would we ever say no to free money? That said, I'm looking for a motion to accept $7,900 in this particular grant.
Hey, Mom. So moved.
Second. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Any questions about this particular grant increase? Seeing none, here comes the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes, that passes 4-0. Next on our agenda, we talked about this a little bit earlier today, revolving accounts. One type of a revolving account is an activity, a student activity account. We also talked at the end of last year and again at the beginning of this year, we cleaned up all our old activity accounts and we kind of made a little promise to ourselves that each year we would take things off the books and make sure and really buckle down on if you want to start a new activity account, it needs to come to F&F. We need to approve it. So in that spirit, the class of 2028 wishes to set up their revolving account to begin saving, and then everybody who's ever had a high school student at Beverly High knows you put money in there, and then hopefully your prom ticket isn't quite so expensive in your senior year, right? That was the net of probably the reality of this particular fund. So I'm looking for a motion to approve the acceptance of this creation of a high school activity account for the class of 2028.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. A second.
Second?
Thank you, Dr. Silva. Any questions? Seeing none, here comes the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho, We'll come back to you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Myself, yes, that passes 4-0. All right, hold on a minute, because I have to switch my notes pages. Okay. What is next? Okay, so next we are looking at some policies, and there are 3 policies to consider. 2 of them have not changed at all. Actually, none of the 3 have changed. However, the one I'm showing on the screen right now, MASC, has a slight difference from the Beverly version. And so I tried to highlight that. Actually, I think Donna helped us by trying to highlight that. So the version on the screen right now is MASC. It has to do with security cameras in our schools. And what they say at the end is that law enforcement and emergency response officials shall be granted access to the video recordings or the security systems, quote, as the situation requires. The current Beverly version of this policy says all the same things until that last sentence. And the Beverly version says, law enforcement and emergency response officials shall be granted access to video recordings or the security system after giving prior notice to the school superintendent/designee. So, before we can really discuss this, we need to open a motion and have a second, and then we can open discussion to talk about whether we want one particular version, whether we want to keep the Beverly version, or perhaps go back to the MASC version. So I'm looking for a motion to approve, you got to pick one of the 2 ways, to approve ECAF in one particular version or the other. I don't care which motion we get.
I'll make a motion to accept the original version.
You want MASC's version?
Yes.
Do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Mr. Copeland, thank you. First, second. Okay. I guess I'll open the floor to you, Dr. Silva, for why you want to make the change back to the previous version.
Well, the statement at the end, if it's,
This one?
yes, so if law enforcement needs access to an emergency response, I would think that they would want to have access to those videos as soon as possible, rather than getting prior approval. So to me, it doesn't.
Doesn't say
I'm- if-
prior approval, it says prior notice. And I guess my counter to you would be, I don't know that I want law enforcement having access to school videos without my superintendent knowing about it. If something happened in the school that police say, I need that videotape, well, first thing we would sure hope that our superintendent knows.
So it's just notice.
You see
It's
the
just
words on the
notice, not
screen.
approval.
The word approval is nowhere there.
Okay,
I make it bigger.
yeah. I just wonder if it would hinder law enforcement's ability to do what they needed to do to work through this policy as to whether or not they should get access to the video or not,
So watch
depending
this.
on how it's written.
Without my fingers ever losing my hands, I'm going to look across the table and I'm going to ask our executive director of operations if there has ever even been any times that law enforcement requested videotapes out of our security cameras in our schools.
Yes, there have been.
And can you speak to, I understand there's probably a lot of things you can't speak to about that. I used to hold a security clearance and I would joke like, oh, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you. So I respect that there's probably a lot you can't tell us. However, can you tell us a little bit about the urgency of the nature of those requests and whether Dr. Silva's concern about delay, right, depending on which version of this file we take, one would say there's absolutely no delay because we know we don't have to get anybody's, it is not even approval, but we don't even have to notify anybody. We just get access versus however much time it would take to send that email. Oh, by the way, superintendent, whoever, fill in a name here because it'll be different soon. We're sending these tapes to the law enforcement because they had a warrant for them, for instance.
So, like, you're situation that you're talking about, in terms of an emergency, there's not going to be any delay in that, them being able to access that's something I would not worry about in terms of their access to the camera situation. Where the notice is helpful is if there are other kind of maybe lower level things that come through and requests for, maybe something happened on the premises or so forth outside, et cetera. We would want to be, they're not emergency situations, they're that next lower level of situation that we would want to have notification that they are interested in those tapes.
I just want to be assured that law enforcement isn't going to be hindered
No.
into doing what they need to do, because there have been incidents on other school properties that have been tragic, that I would hate to, have a policy that hinders law enforcement into, being able to access the videos for any type of, investigation that they deem appropriate for surveying the video footage.
I have a follow-up question. What has to happen, can just quote-unquote any old police officer say, give me the videotape? Right, I knew the answer, but I don't know how else to ask it. So can you speak to that part of what would have to happen for us to grant that access anyway, separate from whether the superintendent is notified or not?
Well, how it typically works is they would notify the superintendent if it were a situation where they were requesting video of something that occurred that they needed for a case or something going on. If in fact it was an emergent situation, we're in direct contact with them, so it wouldn't be like we would be holding them up from accessing the security system. We're in direct contact with them immediately in terms of those situations. So
But could the superintendent say no to that?
in an emergent situation?
Well, you had said that they would notify the superintendent, and could the superintendent say no?
I wouldn't say, I guess that's never occurred, so
But given the policy,
Sue's online, isn't
Yep.
she?
given the policy,
maybe answer that one a
could the
little bit.
superintendent say no?
No, because it's prior notice as opposed to approval.
So, hi.
Thank you.
It's Superintendent.
I was just looking for my main Zoom window to ask you to unmute.
Yes. I would say this. I guess it's a question of interpretation of the policy. So much like we, in an emergency, I would assume the police would be acting in whatever way they can act. Notifying me, though, they always do, and I do not say no. So I guess I'm like Aaron, I'm thinking of different scenarios, right? So Jeff, the one that you, I think were referring to that was tragic, certainly no one would have, whatever police have to do in an emergency situation, they do. I don't know whether notification to me or not would stop them anyway. I think that we're talking about the lower level scenarios. I want to remind you all that there are SROs in our high school and our middle school now, and they, work very closely with the administrators in those buildings, and they often can and do utilize the video, to clarify situations or to kind of, do things. So, I guess if you're looking at the strict letter of the policy that says that police in an emergency can have access to it would be good. I would be, I don't think I would be happy if I was not notified when video was accessed at any point in time. I would want to be notified at any point in time that video has been accessed.
Yeah, and I think, I think in terms of notification is not what I'm concerned about. I'm thinking, what I'm concerned about is whether or not it would hinder police response time to acting on an emergency. So if it's a matter of sending an email and it's sent, and then they go and continue
I don't
along.
think that does it say prior notification?
It says,
Can you repeat?
it says,
I'm sorry, I apologize,
will-
I'm not
all
looking
right.
at
It says
I'm driving,
prior notice.
well, I will read the sentence again. Law enforcement and emergency response officials shall be granted access to video recordings or the security system, which would mean, live, but you can also rewind in there, quote, after giving prior notice to the school superintendent / designee.
So I guess I would defer to an opinion by the police chief in terms of how they feel about the wording of this before I were to vote on this.
Okay, we can table this particular policy, and
I would be interested in kind of talking that out as well. I think the language, so I certainly am not looking to restrict, particularly if it's a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday, I don't want to get in the way of an emergency situation. However, I also don't want to give up my right or the expectation that prior notice is the proper procedure to go short of an emergency situation. Because I feel that we don't want, we have a lot of procedures in place for security. We have, building leaders at each building that, have maintained those videos. And we also have requests from a lot of people for videos. And so we don't just distribute them. But I'll give you an example of when a video might be requested. We have video on buses, and so it could be that something occurred in the street and they're looking for video, and we're not getting involved in insurance claims. We're not, you know what I mean? So we're very careful with how we release video.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron, would you concur with that? Is that?
Yes, I would agree with that. And generally speaking, we have a very good relationship with the police.
Yeah, I guess,
I-
I don't know, my gut is just telling me
okay,
I would just
I'm happy
I
to
would like
honor
to
that
hear
by
what they,
saying, can we, schedule a time, or maybe, maybe our administration speaks with Chief
Yeah.
LaLasher,
I'm
and then
happy to
brings us something
I'm happy to
forward.
come back with some suggestions, work with him, and do that. I think that's a great way to kind of move forward. So I'm happy to do that.
okay, sorry
No,
about
don't
that.
be. This is why we bring these forward and we have these conversations. So there are two other policies on our
Just real
agenda.
quick, I had something on that too, just before we wrap that up.
Sorry.
I think because it says law enforcement, so it's not just necessarily just local law enforcement as well. So there could be federal, state, ICE agents, could be anything that could request for who knows what could happen going forward. So I think that's something to take into consideration as well.
Well, that was to some extent, I appreciate that. And that's to some extent why I was asking Ms. Brown, what has to happen? So if it's a Beverly police officer, then I think we're in a very different scenario than there was something else that Dr. Chirocek put out a couple of weeks ago around who gets to go into one of our buildings, right? So Dr. Chirocek, can you maybe speak to that a little bit about this policy relative to who's asking for the access?
So I would, we're getting into so I would ensure everyone that Beverly Police has a relationship with the schools that would be different than any other. Even I think if the state police were to come in, they'd have to go through the Beverly Police. Mm-hmm. However, we would not release any information or anything that would be, personally identifiable for any of our students or our families without a proper warrant of some sort. So that would really be prior notification, right? We would not release anything to anyone without the proper legal authority telling us. And I think Ms. Spizik, you went through the same training that I did. There are very clear guidelines as to what we would require before we would even engage in a discussion or conversation. And I can assure you that, that is why there would be there's no access to anything in our buildings by anyone outside, based upon the laws in Massachusetts and the way that we are required to protect security and personally identifiable information. And video would fall into that category. So,
Fantastic. Thank you.
did that answer you?
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I have opened, the other two policies are in Microsoft Word format. So, first one is ECB, building maintenance. Again, before we can really discuss this particular policy, no changes have been made to it. Sometimes policies come before us because MASC suggests an update. Sometimes they come before us just because we try to visit every policy within 5 years and make sure they're not too far out of date. I think because of the current climate, Donna took the initiative to bring forward the difference in that last policy. To be very clear, that change was not requested by MASC. Rather, we just point out that our policy differs slightly from MASC's on that last one. And for the record, we are tabling that, right, Dr. Silva, the previous one, and we will have an action item for Dr. Chirocek to speak with Police Chief LaLacheur. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly in all of my French language. All right, so ECB, we have not updated this. It's just in front of us as, let's review it within 5 years. And down at the bottom of every policy, I'm going to try to make this a little bigger and scroll over here. The source of a given policy means, did it come from MASC, or sometimes you'll see MASC, Beverly here. This particular policy, in fact, is ours and ours alone. And then the legal reference, this is it comes from Mass General Law. Sometimes you'll see here a charter, like a section of the charter listed. Many times when our source says Beverly, then there's also a charter reference in it. So there is no conflict with MASC on this particular policy. I would have to really super duper go double check, but I'm fairly confident that this is just ours and ours alone. And so I'm looking for a motion to, and again, the process is that this committee, if we're happy with this policy, we move it forward to the committee of the whole. It comes out of our subcommittee, goes to the committee of the whole for a first reading, and then a second reading, and then a vote. Yes, Dr. Silva.
Motion to approve with an edit or an amendment to this?
That's absolutely, this is what our body is supposed to do, is if we're not happy with it. So hold on, let's get a motion. I need a second.
A second.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. What is and then you're going to bring forward now a motion to amend, and what would you like to change?
So, in the last statement about the municipal department and public services, it says that they're responsible for clearing the snow and ice from the school building parking lots, but it doesn't say anything about the access road into the...
Are we looking at the same?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong one.
You're tricking me.
I'm sorry.
No, please don't be. Hold that, because we'll get to that policy in just a second.
I was at the wrong one, sorry about that.
Do you have any edits to ECB? Any suggested
No.
edits to ECB? No. All right, I'm looking online. Anybody have, Ms. Coelho, are you happy with ECB? I don't see your hand up, so.
It's fine with me.
Okay,
It's fine with me.
okay. So there's a motion on the table. We'll call the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland.
Yes.
Myself, yes, that passes 4-0. And now, Dr. Silva, conservation is policy ECF/EDE. I'm bring that up a little higher on the screen and make it a little bigger because it's a short little policy, short just like me. Is this the policy you're thinking of?
No.
Also no.
I'm looking, never mind. So the ECB was the previous one
Yeah.
that we were looking at,
Right, you were talking snow removal down the bottom.
at the bottom.
He was thinking of the last sentence on
All right,
snow
I'll bring
removal.
it back. I'll have to.
Yeah, the last sentence just says that the DPS is responsible for clearing the snow and ice from the school building parking lots, but it doesn't say anything about the access road. And it also says that the custodian is responsible for removal of snow, ice from the walkways and sidewalks, so it leaves the access roads no one's responsibility as it's written.
All right, so I think from a procedural point of view, I
We have to
need us to make a
take back.
motion of reconsideration.
Yeah,
Would you like to make that motion?
I would like to make that motion.
Okay. Yeah, I need a second for a motion for reconsideration.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. All right, go ahead and discuss.
So the amendment to the policy ECB would be to include as in the responsibility of the DPS, or, as well as responsible contractor employed by the DPS, responsible for clearing snow and ice from the school building parking lots and access road.
All right, I need a second on that amendment before we can talk about it. Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, second.
I think that somebody's going to be very proud of me that I knew my little Robert's rules, and I'm just going to be bragging about that. Okay, so it just so happens, I guess we have Mr. Shirley on the phone, and I'm thinking that I should ask him to unmute and speak to this. What are our, what is the, within the realm of the schools and the school maintenance versus what, can we even say what the city is responsible for versus what we're responsible for? Because, Dr. Silva, my amendment would be, now that we have the correct policy up and you drew my attention to this, would be to remove that whole second sentence. I don't get to be the boss of DPS. I don't get to tell DPS what they do or when they do it, how they do it, whether they use contractors or not. But rather, the intent of this policy, I believe, is to scope that what snow removal is within the realm of our school maintenance B&G guys. But I just asked Mr. Shirley to speak, so maybe I'm way off base. Mr. Shirley, could you speak to this, please?
Yeah, so I get some clarification on access roads. Do you mean the roads going from any street into the parking lot? Is that what you're referring to, Jeff?
That's correct. The
Like the
road,
driveway?
the street that's, the street
Yeah.
that access or around the perimeter of the building, around the.
Yeah, so, yep, so with the contracts that DPS has with our contractors, our vendors, they do any emergency roads around the buildings. So a lot of them will like just walkways, but they are emergency access roads. So they are liable for plowing those. They plow all of the parking lots. If you look at specifics at the Cove School, where you have, I can't think of the road, but you have that walkway that a lot of families walk down to get to Cove, the back way there. They plow that. So when DPS puts the scope out, and typically Iron Tree has been the winning bidder the last few years, they know what they have to do, and it's taken care of in that way. And this is correct when it says that the custodians are in charge of all the sidewalks. So if you look at access roads, you can see these are city roads, and the city is in charge of clearing those roads. I don't necessarily think you need any language around that, because those roadways leading to parking lots and schools are deemed city roads, which the city has to clear during any snow event.
So, given that, do you think this sentence that I have highlighted on my screen, that the scope of what the municipal department of public services is going to do, would it be best if we just didn't have that sentence in our policy at all? We should just speak to what, quote unquote, you and your team do?
So technically, me and my team report to the DPS. We're part of the DPS, but I think having it in there is fine. because I believe maybe the access road is left out of there because it's considered a city road, right? And all of the DPS is in charge of clearing every city road whenever there's a snow event.
All
So
right.
maybe that's why this is spelled out where, okay, the schools are not the access roads, that's the city. The schools are the parking lots and the sidewalks.
Okay. I mean,
That's how I look at and interpret it.
the reason why I commented on it is because the road was absent in this policy, and if you're saying that we don't need to put it in there, then, and it's part of the city's responsibility, then I guess that's fine.
Yeah, that's what I think it is. I think that it's a road that has a name, and the city owns that, whether they are outsourcing or whether it's the city trucks going through doing it.
Yeah, I like the idea of having it in the policy so that it's not left unknown.
You like
So
that sentence?
I agree with that. Yes.
All right, so your amendment was that we add access roads to this policy.
Just so that it's clear. Yes.
And are you happy with that verbiage?
I'm
Can you
happy.
see it? You need me to make it bigger?
I'm happy with the verbiage. Yep,
As your motion?
as my motion.
And we have a second on that motion. So now, Robert and his rules are killing me this evening. We have to vote on this motion, on this amendment. Dr. Silva, I'm sorry, you get
Yes.
2 titles.
That's okay.
Okay, so Silva, yes. Ms. Coelho, we added a sentence to this
Yes.
policy, thank you. Mr. Copeland?
Yes.
Myself, yes. All right, so the amendment passes 4-0, and now we return to approving policy ECB as amended. And we need, can I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland.
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Silva. And we're going to, any more comments on this conversation? I'm going to highlight this over here because I have to send it back to Donna. I'll figure out how to save later. All right, we're going to call the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes. So that passes 4-0. Thank you for catching that I blew past that. I apologize, Dr. Silva. All right, so now we're going to policy ECF/EDE on conservation. It is on the screen. It's a short little policy, as I was making my joke, short like me. Can I have a motion so we can begin the discussion? Motion to accept this policy as is?
Motion to accept the policy as is.
Thank you, Dr. Silva. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Are there any comments, suggestions, amendments on this particular policy? I will say we came, 3 of us came from a meeting. Dr. Chirochek, some number, I don't know, a year or 2 ago, created a operational sustainability committee where we routinely look at things relative to conservation of resources and ways we can improve, including but not limited to increasing our number of electric buses. Mr. Schroely spoke at that meeting earlier this afternoon about replacing LED lights in the different schools. So I would say we actually do a lot more than is actually listed in this policy. So anyway, all right, I'm going to call the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland.
Yes.
Thank you, Lorinda. Yes, that passes 4-0. Whew. Okay, we're going to leave that policy on the screen for me to deal with after we finish. Where are we? We have voted on all of these things. And we are already over time, so I'm going to very quickly ask the members of this committee, as well as you, Ms. Puglisi, Members of the committee, if you have any questions on the revenue or the expense report as included in your packets, do you have any questions? There's nothing to vote here. We usually just review these things, and they were in your packet. Or Ms. Puglisi, do you have anything in either of those reports that you're concerned about that you'd like to call our attention to?
Very, very.
You have to say it, it doesn't count.
Very quickly, there were just a few things that I'm sure as you went through, I would want you to know that I am also keeping my eye on. So I'm keeping my eye on our utility expense accounts. We talked a bit about that last night, so I won't belabor the point. But suffice it to say, we are keeping our eye on where they are, and probably similar to like you're seeing on your residential utility accounts, utility prices are up, and we are seeing that in our budget. We talked a little bit about snow removal earlier, and so I just wanted to let you know that we are aware that both our contracted services and staff overtime relative to snow removal are currently fully expended and in a deficit. The report in front of you does not include the costs incurred for the 216 snowstorm snow removal. So those figures will be a little bit higher in your next report. And we're currently keeping an eye on these lines as the winter season progresses to determine if we can cover them internally or if we'll need additional support from the city. And Mr. Shiroli was kind enough to share with me that one of the reasons that this year's snow removal costs are outpacing recent years is due to the significantly colder weather and the multiple storms that we've seen. So I just want to let you know that those were on our radar. And if there's any other questions, please feel free to reach out via email. I'm happy to talk about these things at greater length.
All right, so I am going to go back to this, right? I want to let you guys go home, but we really need to, we talked about this, we've talked about pest control at a previous meeting, and I think we, based on where we are on the calendar, if you guys really want to push this to another meeting, I guess we could, but I would like this body, if possible this evening, to vote on a plan to move forward, or to either vote to move it forward or to say, no, we don't want to move it forward, relative to the proposed pilot. And so, how many slides you got in here? You want me to scroll?
Yeah, you can scroll forward. And Mr. Shirley is going to talk a little bit about this. We had questions on it last time. Really quickly, this is a review of the data from reporting from staff, because this came up through negotiations as an issue. And so we had put out a survey for staff when they had seen my rodents and or evidence of rodents, then they were letting us know. So BHS certainly stood out to us. We thought about, Mr. Shirley and I thought about a pilot program for the summertime for the high school. There were questions last time in terms of that. We were looking at the next slide. Here are some current ways that we're trying to control pest measures with traps, reduction in available food sources, improper storage of food items, and trying to look at that, as well as inspection of exterior doors. So those are things we're already doing, but what else could we do? And so we came up with some options. We talked last time about bait boxes, and some of the questions being outside or inside, as well as transmission to dogs or wildlife and so forth if the animal ate one of the rodents that had got out of the bait box with the rodenticide. So, Mr. Shirley, if you want to talk a little bit about some of those things that we talked about and share with the committee in terms of what that pilot would look like, in terms of when, where, and kind of that option, as well as, the transmission, thoughts on transmission from our pest control source.
Sure. So as you can see here, we have spelled out option one. So we contacted our vendor Waltham Pest and got a little more detail from them on the type of product they use, the boxes, and everything that encompasses this. One thing with rodents already in the building, having a rodenticide to help exterminate them would definitely help. Again, other things that we mentioned last time was reducing food and things like that. We frequently try to seal the doors on a regular basis to look at entry points for rodents. So with what Aaron was saying with our proposal here is we would try to do a pilot in the summer where there's less students and activity at the high school. We would not put any bait boxes in any classrooms. Everything would be in either offices or back of house areas. So we wouldn't have to worry about any students even being limited in the schools, getting into them. And with that, this is something that we could pilot at the school to see if it has any effect to try to limit the activity within the school. Other options that Waltham Pest also suggested was putting exterior bait boxes. So if we do go this route, one way, if we start eliminating them inside, the next step is to prevent any new ones from coming in and having bait boxes around buildings. I'm sure everyone's seen the black square boxes on the outside of many commercial buildings. That's just a way to use rodenticide to reduce them from entering the buildings. So I know there was a big question on transmission. The product that Waltham uses has a very minimal transition, so the bait quickly passes through the rodent system. Again, anything that you use, I don't know, whether it's a product you look on the shelf at Home Depot, if you really read the labels, anything could be toxic. Most things are toxic to humans or animals. So of course there is that chance, but I talked in depth with Waltham and they said there's a very, very minimal chance of that happening with this product. And they really haven't seen it, the concerns that we have with their experience.
So one of the things we
And-
talked about, Bob,
Go
was,
ahead.
whoops,
No, go ahead.
was looking at, for this pilot, doing it inside only. I know there's a big concern about, a dog or so forth that might eat something outside, but I think our plan initially was to be looking at inside. Yes, outside is another option in the future if we wanted to look at that, but for the pilot this time, we'd be looking at just inside.
And Mr. Shirley, did you say last time we discussed this, that if a rodent were in a building and had a food source, it was most likely staying in the building? I made my little who moved my cheese joke, right? Why would I leave if I have a food source and I have a water source? And therefore, okay, so do we have any more slides?
No. The other option on there was just kind of looking at not doing that, which we're fine to do too, and look at the high reported areas in the building and, increase the number of traps that we have in those areas. So that's option 2. So the next slide just talks about, again, that pilot program, and we have the ability to, you have the ability to waive the policy in order to conduct a pilot program in the summer of 2025 or not. We can certainly look at the other. Both options are options available to you. And I provided you just a little information that Bob had given me regarding, the rodenticide.
Right. So when the artifacts of this meeting are posted, I will make sure that additional information is scanned and posted as well. So for those of you not in the room, this is another reason why you should come to our meetings. You never know. There could be cookies. There could be handouts. Today we got a handout. No cookie. Sorry, Steve. Sorry. But I want you to maybe come back another time, so that you never know. There could be snacks. So I'll for those of you not in the room, I just want to say, and I do see your hand, Dr. Silva, that this particular additional piece of information from the company that we may in fact use or we may not use was handed to us, and so I'll get that up on the website as soon as possible. Yes, Dr. Silva.
So, the active ingredient of the contract blocks is a compound that causes the rodent to bleed out, and so prevents the clotting. And depending on how much is in there and how much they eat and how much is accessible, if a bird eats it, if a small cat, that can also affect that animal. So I would just be careful and cognizant of the fact that, it's not just, if the rodent gets out, it will affect other animals if it leaves the building.
I understand that, and I understand that, and that's part of the reason why we asked Bob, we asked for some more information, and that's why I just asked him the question about what is the likelihood that that animal, quote unquote, bothers to leave the building, versus I'm going to come and go. I know how I can get in and out, and I'm going to come and go as much as I like, versus, hey, I came in here and I found a great place to live, low rent,
Yep.
low food prices. So I don't mean to make light of it, but I also want to be incredibly cognizant of the fact that this is an issue both for our students and for our staff, right? And it was a big point of a big bone of contention during our negotiations. Right? And so if we don't do this, what else could we do? Because the issue needs to be addressed.
There are traps around the perimeter that could be used, and other non-toxic methods.
Right. So one of the methods outside the building instead of inside the building is the same thing, but just outside instead of inside. I personally am more worried about them outside than inside.
But there are traps that you can put outside the building that deliver an electric shock to the rodent that is not a poison.
Maybe
To
Bob-
clarify on that, the city did have those electric traps, and we've since done away with them.
Okay.
I'm not sure the decision behind that, whether it wasn't cost effective or it wasn't yielding the results that we were looking for, but I know we've had a few incidences in the past. I was able to receive some at a certain school, and then I asked again, and they said we discontinued that partnership.
Okay.
So again, I think from a process point of view, right, this body gets to decide whether we want to consider waiving this policy for the purpose of this pilot at BHS only during the summer when we have far fewer students in and out of that building. And even if we vote yes, it goes to the committee of the whole for consideration and a vote.
Okay.
I don't, as the chair of this committee, I would like to see us try this pilot. I don't want that to unduly influence any of you, but we do need a motion. We have one more thing I'm going to torture y'all, make you stay and vote on, and then hopefully we can be out of here by 8 o'clock. So I'm looking for a motion either way on this proposed pilot. Dom, what you got, baby?
Motion to accept, let's say, as is, or the additional pilot.
To run the pilot, which means,
Run the pilot.
to be very clear, we need to set aside a policy that says we don't use chemicals on our school grounds because the bait boxes will have chemicals in them. And so just to be sure, your motion is to use the bait boxes in the high school for this pilot this summer.
During the summer, correct, yes.
Do I have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Dr. Silva. I think we've...
Ms. Visnick? Ms.
Yeah.
Visnick?
Yes?
Hi, I just wanted to clarify, in terms of policy, I looked really through the manual. You don't have to set the entire policy aside in forever. You can just waive it for this particular pilot. Our policy says we can waive a policy. We have
Yes.
a policy that we can waive a policy sort of for a project. So
Yes.
you don't have to, the policy would still remain that we don't, with the exception of this one pilot. And
Yes.
then you would have to reconsider if you were going to expand.
Right. I'm sorry if I misrepresented that.
No, I just want to make sure that I didn't want you to think you had to vacate a whole policy. You
No.
just have to waive it for this particular project.
Right. We're scoping the waiving to this pilot this summer at BHS.
Correct. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that so you didn't,
Okay, cool.
vacate a whole policy that you didn't need to do.
All right. I need
All
to write down. Here's our, so we had a motion by Mr. Copeland. We had a second by Dr. Silva. Roll call. Dr. Silva.
Can I add something?
Yes, sir.
Can we post signage to say that the pilot's in place and that people shouldn't walk their pets around the building during this time?
Mr. Shiroli, did you,
Yeah, we can post signage, and anybody that's going to be utilizing the building, Waltham Pest would draft a document for us to, typically the principals send out to families and other districts when they're doing this to notify everybody.
I would feel
we do
better.
also have signs. People shouldn't be walking animals around the buildings, anyways.
we have a policy that no
understand.
dogs are allowed on campus,
Yes.
by the way.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, but could we put up signs during the summer, even if they look like, almost like an election sign that you just poke into the ground? Like the booster signs that says, pesticide in use?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, we could put bright neon signs on the exterior doors.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, cool. All right, so now can we take the roll call vote, Dr. Silva?
Yes.
Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes, that passes 4-0. Very quickly, I'm hoping we can look at, is it in this
Yep.
presentation?
Yes, it is.
I'm just jumping ahead.
Yep.
We have on your screen, on the screen right now, we have a building rental form. We have a process when people want to use our buildings. If you're a volunteer coach and you're coaching Beverly children, you get to use them for free. A lot of other organizations come in. We have a revolving account for when people come in and rent our buildings for various reasons, dance recitals, etc. And so, with that introduction, Ms. Brown or Ms. Puglisi, do you want to talk to how we're not charging enough money to cover the expenses? When we open a building to someone else, we're not charging them enough. And so what you see on your screen is, I asked you to speak and then I'm not letting you speak. We're proposing here, and we need to vote as a body on whether to increase the fee that we're charging to people who fall into the category of, yeah, you need to pay to use our building. And the intent is that what we would be charging you would actually cover our expenses of paying our personnel to work overtime to give you access to said building.
Specifically looking at, our custodial, or if they want to use kitchen workers, their new contracted rates. That was one area, as well as breaking apart our technology package into more appropriate packages and level of service and knowledge into a basic level and something that's a little higher level that people do request on a relatively consistent basis. And then finally, use of some of our furniture, breaking that down. Before it was one $25 fee versus Mr. Shirley had seen a lot of wear and tear on items, so kind of thinking about putting the tables and chairs and setup and so forth for them, depending on the school, they're very heavy chairs, et cetera, putting those in kind of different buckets, and that's what we added to that. And then a 5% on the private use fees across the board.
These are great.
Okay, I'm looking for a motion to add the $5 per hour fee on some of this form and to add the new rate on the tables and chairs.
Motion?
Dr. Silva, thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Yes, Dr. Silva?
I have a short question. How often is this updated?
How often are the fees
Yeah.
updated? Mr. Shirley and I talked that it had been a while. It's been at least 4 years since
Yeah,
this has been
I would
updated.
argue that this should be done every 2 years, at least.
So noted.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, any other
And-
questions, comments? Yes, Mr. Copeland?
So will this cover the actual cost as far as the usage, or?
Are we going enough?
Yeah, we're doing it.
Yeah, right.
Yes, I think at this point, we're doing, this will definitely, one of our biggest costs are the custodial fees and the overtime for that. So this will cover that. We factored that in terms of what they currently make, based on their current new contracts. So that's probably one of the bigger areas that we needed to make sure that we covered.
That's good.
And are The fields, are they different? Are they covered by the city?
Yeah, Rex, Park and Rec.
Okay, I think we're done discussing. I'm going to call the roll. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes, that passes 4-0. Motion to adjourn, please.
Motion.
Thank you, Dr. Silva.
Second and third.
Thank you, Mr. Copeland. Got to do a roll call. Dr. Silva,
Yes.
Ms. Coelho,
Yes.
Mr. Copeland,
Yes.
myself, yes, that passes 4-0. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry we ran over. Got a lot of work done this evening. Thank you, Kim from BevCam.
Thank you.